Can you really see the best of Strasbourg in just one day without rushing or missing the good stuff? I already tested the route, timed the stops, found what's actually worth it, and picked up a few practical tips that are hard to find online. So, stay till the end because I'll show you exactly how to spend one perfect day in Strasbourg. Day 1. Exploring Strasbourg's historic heart. Morning, Petite France. Petite France is the best place to begin a day in Strasbourg. This is the city's most famous district, the area where fishermen, millers, and tanners once lived and worked, thanks to canals that run through the neighborhood. Today, those same waterways frame some of the best preserved half-timbered houses in the city. Wandering these narrow cobbled paths early in the morning before the crowd woke up was incredibly peaceful. The streets are almost entirely closed to cars, so I could just focus on the sound of the water rushing against the stone banks and smell of fresh butter and sugar from the local bakeries. The actual scale of these old buildings is wild to see up close. Some of the massive timber roofs lean out so far over the canals, they look like they're bowing to each other. Insider tip. If you head down toward the historic swing bridge near the old mills, try to hang around for a few minutes if a canal boat is approaching. The entire wooden pedestrian deck silently pivots on a massive central gear to let the boat squeeze past with only inches to spare, which is a great little engineering show you can watch right from the water's edge. Vauban Dam. Just a few minutes beyond Petite France stands the Vauban Dam. From a distance, it looks like a fairly simple stone structure crossing the river, but its history is much more interesting than it first appears. The dam was built after advances in artillery made Strasbourg's original defenses less effective. In the event of an attack, its arches could be blocked to raise the water level of the Ille River and deliberately flood the surrounding fields to trap enemy troops in thick mud before they could reach the city. It's completely free to enter, and you could walk right through the interior corridor to see several historic gargoyle sculptures on the display before heading up to the panoramic terrace on the roof. I expected the gargoyles inside to be the highlight here. In reality, I spent far more time on the terrace than planned, just taking in the view across the canals, the old covered bridges, and the historic center. The vantage point from up there is incredible, and it's the best spot I found to see the Old Town rooftops stretching out toward the cathedral. Insider tip. There's a small elevator tucked near the structural housing on the roof terrace that goes down to the ground level. Taking this instead of the tight, crowded stone stairs is a massive relief if your knees are starting to ache or you're lugging around a heavy day pack. Covered bridges. The covered bridges are one of Strasbourg's landmarks with a slightly misleading name. The wooden roofs that once covered them disappeared centuries ago, but the name remained. Originally, the bridges formed part of the city's defense system and connected 3 medieval brick towers that still stand today. Those towers were the first thing that grabbed my attention. After spending the morning wandering through Petite France with its colorful houses, suddenly seeing those dark, imposing brick fortifications completely changed the mood. It's a stark reminder that Strasbourg wasn't just built to be a beautiful trading hub, it actively had to fight to defend itself. It costs absolutely nothing to walk across the stone footbridges, and you can get right up to the base of the massive defensive walls. The best perspective comes from combining this stop with the Vauban Dam roof terrace. Looking across from that vantage point gives you a clear view of how the bridges link the 3 towers together, while the canals weave right through the middle of the historic district. Insider tip. While you're crossing the bridges, look down at the stone pillars underneath the structures. You can see the original heavy iron rings built directly into the masonry. These were used to anchor massive floating chain barriers across the river channels to physically stop enemy warships from sneaking into the city center under the cover of night. Late morning, Strasbourg Cathedral. By the time I reached Strasbourg Cathedral, I already understood why it dominates almost every photo of the city. No matter where I'd been that morning, the massive spire kept appearing above the rooftops and pulling me back toward the center. This is the symbol of Strasbourg and remains one of the oldest Gothic cathedrals in the world. Entry to the main cathedral is completely free, and the enormous rose window on the facade is incredible to see up close. The biggest event of the day happens at exactly 12:30 p.m., when the famous astronomical clock comes alive with a procession of mechanical figures. Tickets for the clock show cost $4.50. Even knowing it was coming, I still found myself squeezed among dozens of people staring at a clock, waiting for it to move. Which sounds ridiculous, but it's a classic local tradition. You can also climb 332 steps to the cathedral platform for $11. After already visiting the terrace at Vauban Dam, I debated skipping this part. What changed my mind was the sheer height. Standing on Strasbourg's most famous landmark and looking across the city feels very different from viewing it from the fortifications. On a clear day, you can even see into Germany. Insider tip. Tickets for the daily clock show go on sale right at the cathedral, starting at 11:30 a.m., but the doors for the presentation open at noon. Instead of getting stuck at the back of a massive bottleneck, buy your ticket early, grab a quick coffee nearby, and loop back around 11:45 a.m. so you're right at the front of the line when they open the side doors. Afternoon. Lunch at Kammerzell House. By lunchtime, I was ready for a break, and Kammerzell House turned out to be much more than somewhere just to eat. The building itself is one of Strasbourg's most famous landmarks and is often described as the city's most beautiful half-timbered house. Before I even looked at the menu, I spent a few minutes studying the facade. The wooden carvings are packed with details from zodiac signs to historical figures, and it rewards looking up instead of rushing through the doorway. Inside, the atmosphere feels completely different from the busy cathedral square. The dining rooms are spread through historic spaces dating back centuries, filled with carved woodwork and heavy, old-world details. The dish I couldn't ignore was the restaurant's signature choucroute aux trois poissons, which costs around $32. I'll admit that fish and sauerkraut sounded like a strange combination when I first read it. Once it arrived, though, it made much more sense. The sauerkraut has a gentle acidity rather than an aggressive sourness, while the salmon, halibut, and smoked haddock each bring a different texture. The smoked haddock is especially noticeable and gives the whole plate far more character than I expected. It's a legendary local recipe created right here back in 1970. Kammerzell House is definitely one of the more touristy lunch spots in Strasbourg, and you can feel that at times. Even so, eating one of the city's best-known specialties inside such a historic building felt entirely right after spending the morning exploring the old town. Sometimes the famous choice is famous for a reason. Rohan Palace. After lunch, I headed a few steps from the cathedral to the Rohan Palace. This massive classical structure was once home to the princess of the Rohan family, which explains the sheer scale of the place. The long classical facade is impressive, especially after a morning surrounded by timber-framed houses and medieval streets. Inside, the building is split into 3 separate museums covering archaeology, fine arts, and decorative arts, with tickets costing about $8 for each one. I don't think you need to see every gallery unless you're a serious museum enthusiast. Trying to rush through all 3 simply because they're in the same building can start feeling more like homework than sightseeing. I just focused on enjoying the palace architecture itself and picked the single collection that interested me the most. What stayed with me most was the contrast. Within a few hours, Strasbourg went from medieval canals and defensive towers to Gothic cathedrals and now an aristocratic palace. Insider tip. If you want to see the stunning interior of the building without buying tickets, you can walk right into the main central courtyard for free. It gives you an incredible up-close view of the monumental classical columns and regal sculptures. Late afternoon. Place Gutenberg. After leaving the Rohan Palace, I ended up right in Place Gutenberg. It's named after Johannes Gutenberg, who spent about 10 years in Strasbourg developing the movable type printing press. A bronze statue of him stands right in the middle holding a parchment, so it's impossible to miss. The square served as the city's political hub from the Middle Ages until the 18th century. The main standout building here is the Old Chamber of Commerce, a large Renaissance structure with unique sloped roofs and decorative skylights. This is a completely free public space, and it's the best spot I found to just grab a quick coffee, sit on a bench, and watch the local traffic move between the shops. Insider tip: if you appreciate vintage books or prints, look out for the local second-hand booksellers who regularly set up wooden stalls around the square. You can find rare old engravings, vintage posters, and historic regional postcards tucked into their bins for just a few dollars, making it a much better souvenir than standard gift shop trinkets. Place Kléber. A short walk later, I reached Place Kléber, Strasbourg's main square. The entire plaza is pedestrianized, filled with wide-open spaces, water fountains, and local shops. I ended up sitting on a bench right in front of the Aubette, which is a massive pink sandstone building from 1770. Apparently, it got its name because soldiers used to gather here at dawn to get their daily orders. Right in the center of the square, there's a large bronze statue of General Kléber, after whom the plaza is actually named. His ashes are buried in a crypt directly underneath the monument. Standing out there, I also noticed the massive 1970s glass and steel commercial block on the corner, which locals just call the Fnac building. It looks incredibly out of place next to the historic facade of the Aubette, but it has a crazy backstory. It was built on the site of a legendary 13th century luxury palace hotel called the Maison Rouge. It hosted everyone from Victor Hugo to Winston Churchill before the city controversially tore it down in 1973 to build this modern shopping center. During major events, this entire plaza becomes the main gathering point for the city, and if you happen to visit during the winter, this is the exact spot where they set up Strasbourg's famous giant Christmas tree. Early evening, shopping in Strasbourg's city center. From Place Kléber, I transitioned into the main shopping district around Rue des Grandes Arcades and Rue du Franc Bourgeois. The vibe here completely shifts away from the heavy tourist spots. The narrow stone-paved lanes are packed with everything from standard international brands like Zara and Fnac to high-end French boutiques and tiny local pastry shops. I didn't come here to buy anything specific, but just walking the loop is worth it because the commercial stores are built right into the bottom floors of these massive, centuries-old historic buildings. It's a seamless mix from the old town architecture with actual functioning city life. It ended up being the easiest way to kill an hour, check out some local window displays, and casually work my way toward the restaurant areas for dinner. Evening, dinner at La Petite Mairie. From the shopping district, I walked a few streets over to La Petite Mairie, a family-run Alsatian restaurant just north of the cathedral. The space inside is quite small and calm, giving it a much more relaxed neighborhood feel than the massive hectic tourist spots right on the main squares. This is the place to try a proper authentic flammekueche, also known as tarte flambée. It's a razor-thin, crispy Alsatian flatbread topped with crème fraîche, onions, and lardons, and they make their dough entirely from scratch in-house. A standard one here costs around $10 to $13, making it a surprisingly affordable dinner. Pairing a classic version with a glass of local Alsatian Riesling was exactly what I needed. After a packed day of exploring everything from medieval canals to Gothic cathedrals, sitting down to a heavy, comforting meal here was the perfect way to wrap up Strasbourg. Useful info for spending one day in Strasbourg. Best time to visit Strasbourg. I visited Strasbourg in early September, and for me it felt like the ideal time to explore the city. The weather was warm enough for long walks around Petite France and the cathedral district without the heat and crowds that peak summer can bring. May, June, September, and early October are generally the most comfortable months to visit, with daytime temperatures often ranging from 18 to 27 degrees Celsius or 64 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit. The one season I'd love to experience here is December. Strasbourg hosts one of Europe's most famous Christmas markets, and the historic center transforms with lights, decorations, and festive stalls. Just be prepared for larger crowds and noticeably higher hotel prices. City airport tips. Most travelers arrive through Strasbourg Airport, located about 10 kilometers or 6 miles southwest of the city center. Since I only had one day in Strasbourg, getting into town quickly mattered more to me than comfort or convenience. The train ended up being the obvious choice. A shuttle connects the terminal to Ensheim Airport Station, and from there, it's about a 10-minute ride to Strasbourg's main station. The total journey usually costs around $5 to $7. Taxis are available outside the terminal and generally take about 15 to 20 minutes depending on traffic, with fares often ranging between $25 and $40. Where to stay in Strasbourg? Since this was my first visit and I only had one day, I stayed near Grande Ile. Looking back, I wouldn't change that decision. Nearly every stop in this itinerary, from Petite France and the Cathedral to Place Kléber and the Rohan Palace, was within walking distance. Hotels in Grande Ile and Petite France typically range from about $110 to $280 per night, depending on the season. If I were spending several days in Strasbourg instead of one, I'd probably look at Neustadt as well. The district feels less touristy, the streets are wider, and the pace is noticeably calmer once you leave the historic center. Hotels there generally range from about $100 to $220 per night. Another practical option is the area around Strasbourg Station, especially if you're arriving by train or planning day trips around Alsace. Expect hotel prices between roughly $90 and $200 per night. How to get around Strasbourg? One thing I realized pretty quickly is that Strasbourg feels smaller than it looks on a map. During my visit, I spent most of the day walking and rarely felt the need for transportation. The route between Petite France, the Cathedral, Kammerzell House, Place Gutenberg, Place Kléber, and Rohan Palace is surprisingly manageable on foot. For longer distances, especially if you're heading toward the European quarter, the tram network is excellent. A single ticket costs about $2.20 and works across both trams and buses. Strasbourg is also one of the most bike-friendly cities in France, with more than 500 kilometers of cycling paths. After spending a day here, it's not hard to notice just how many locals get around on 2 wheels instead of 4. Where to eat in Strasbourg? Good food is never far away in Strasbourg, but a few places stood out while I was planning the trip and talking to locals. For breakfast, I'd start at Patisserie Boulaire, also known as Maison du Kougelhopf. I stopped by for a coffee and a slice of kougelhopf, the traditional Alsatian cake made with raisins and almonds. It's lighter than it looks and not nearly as sweet as I expected. Breakfast here usually comes in around $5 to $10 per person, depending on what you order. For a classic Alsatian dinner, Au Pain Corbeau would be my pick. It's one of the city's best-known traditional wind stubs and is featured directly in the Michelin Guide. Their choucroute is what I'd order first, a hearty Alsatian specialty built around sauerkraut and a variety of meats. If you're after something even more traditional, the kougelhopf is another local favorite worth considering. Expect to spend around $30 to $50 per person for a dinner. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, Delicious is probably the easiest recommendation in the city. The menu's entirely plant-based, but it never feels like a compromise. The vegan kebabs, burgers, wraps, and homemade cookies all get constantly strong reviews. I never managed to fit it into this one-day itinerary, but it's exactly the sort of place I'd save for a second visit. Most meals fall somewhere between $15 and $30 per person. Between traditional wind stubs, pastry shops, modern cafes, and international restaurants, Strasbourg is one of those cities where choosing where to eat can end up being harder than choosing what to see. And that's how I spent one day in Strasbourg. By the end of the trip, I felt like I understood the city far better than I expected to in such a short time. It's the kind of place where every part seems to add another layer to the story, and that's what makes it so enjoyable to explore. If you found this guide useful, hit like and subscribe, and if you're heading to Colmar next, I've got a guide for that waiting for you right here.